A rich white man rolls the black daughter to the cliff's edge with a smile, then betrays her with a push. But Big Shaq sees it all. What was meant to be murder, hidden as mercy, becomes the spark that ignites justice. This time, power chose the wrong witness. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The sky above Black Ridge Bluff wore the early colors of dawn, like a quiet warning, mauve and peach streaks, bleeding across a canvas that hadn't yet made up its mind, whether it would be kind or cruel. The wind rolled low over the ridge, soft but persistent, whispering secrets only the trees seemed to hear. Shaquille O'Neal stood off the trail, leaning slightly against a bent pine trunk. A heavyweight in the world's eyes, here he was just a tall man, with a sketch pad and a need for stillness. These hills had become a sanctuary, one of the only places where he wasn't being asked for something. His face, his name, his legacy. In this space, he wasn't Big Shaq or the $1 Million Man. He was just Shaquille, a father learning to be quiet in a noisy world. His daughter Minera had recently left for college, and the house had gone quiet in a way that made him ache. Drawing helped, quiet helped, the bluff helped. But the stillness this morning felt different. It pressed on his chest in a way he couldn't name, like the air was folding in on itself. He was halfway through sketching the jagged outcrop across the valley when he heard it. "Daddy," a girl's voice said, soft, almost too soft to carry over the gravel. "Why are we so close to the edge?" Shaq paused, pencil in hand. That wasn't the kind of question you heard in a place like this, especially not from a child. Down the trail, framed against the sky, a man pushed a wheelchair along the narrow path. Shaq tilted slightly to see better, the pine branches brushing his shoulder. The man's coat was tailored, expensive, his posture upright, his gait too smooth. The girl in the chair was small, maybe 9, with dark skin and thick curls pulled into 2 loose puffs. Her scarf, cream against her skin, fluttered in the wind like a flag someone had forgotten to lower. Shaq squinted. The man was Charles Brooks. That much he was sure of. Even from this distance, the polished confidence, the effortless presentation, it was unmistakable. Brooks was known across the state. Tech donor, child advocate, Beacon Hill's golden benefactor, the kind of man whose photo lived in the newspaper more than most elected officials, the kind of man people thanked out loud and questioned in private. And yet here he was, alone with a child at the top of a cliff, inching toward an edge that held nothing but a 70-foot drop and a tangle of boulders. Shaq stepped forward, slow and instinctive, his fingers curling tighter around the sketchpad. The girl's chair jolted slightly over loose gravel. Her gloved hands tightened on the armrests. Something in her posture had shifted, not fear exactly, but confusion, suspicion. The kind of tension a child feels when instinct whispers but experience hasn't caught up yet. Charles Brooks didn't answer her. Instead, he adjusted the sleeves of his coat and looked out at the clearing ahead, his pale blue eyes fixed, detached, calculating. Shaq was still now, breath shallow. He didn't know what was about to happen, but his gut tightened in warning. The same way it used to before a bad pass in the lane, before a betrayal that took time to see clearly. Brooks stopped at the cliff's edge, one hand resting gently on the back of the wheelchair. His voice, when it came, was low, syrupy, rehearsed. "Maya," he said. "You trust me, don't you?" The girl nodded, though it was slow, hesitant. "Close your eyes, sweetheart," he said. "I want you to feel the wind. One last time. This is our special spot. Just you and me." Shaq's entire body stiffened. One last time. The phrase echoed with finality, chilling in its simplicity. The air shifted. Shaq stepped out from the tree cover just slightly, mouth opening, unsure what he was about to say, if anything. But then it happened. Brooks didn't hesitate. He didn't hesitate. With one swift, practiced motion, he pushed forward on the handles. The wheelchair jerked forward. The front wheels lifted. The girl's body tilted. And then she was gone. Shaq's mind screamed, but no one else did. Not the girl. Not Brooks. The silence was deafening. The chair scraped rock, then disappeared over the cliff's edge without so much as a final cry. There was no flailing, no yelling, just the long, cold wind pulling at nothing. Shaq froze. For a half-second, his world narrowed to a single terrible image, a child airborne, silent, forgotten. Brooks stepped to the edge and looked down calmly. Not in shock, not in horror, in confirmation. Then he adjusted his coat, dusted his hands, and turned back toward the trail like it had been just another morning walk. Shaq ducked behind the tree as Brooks passed, heart hammering against his ribs. The man didn't glance back once, didn't run, didn't falter. When the sound of the car door slamming reached him, followed by the soft purr of an engine fading into the woods, Shaq exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He moved. Fast. His boots crunched over brittle leaves as he sprinted toward the edge, the sketch pad falling to the dirt behind him. The bluff opened before him like a maw, rocks jutting from the earth like jagged teeth. 70 feet down, the base was tangled in thorns, moss, and bramble. The kind of place that didn't just break you, it swallowed you. He scanned frantically. At first there was nothing. Then something moved. A flutter. A flicker. A pink scarf, snagged on a thick branch halfway down. Beneath it, wedged between an exposed root system and a jut of rock, the wheelchair, tilted, mangled, but lodged, in Maya. Barely. She wasn't moving much. But her head, it tilted. Shaq's heart nearly stopped. She was alive. He dropped to his knees and leaned out carefully over the edge, wind tugging at his hoodie. Maya, he called. Don't move. I see you. I see you. No answer. Just the wind. Now a chorus of aching voices pushing past him. His hands clenched the ground. What he had just witnessed wasn't an accident. It wasn't panic or negligence. It was cold. It was calculated. And it had almost worked. Shaq pulled back from the edge, his mind already working through the impossible. Who would believe him? Charles Brooks was a man with clean hands and deep pockets. A man who shook the mayor's hand every Christmas and donated laptops to inner-city schools. The man who'd once publicly pledged to end the foster gap for minority children. And Shaquille O'Neal, what was he? A celebrity. A talking head on ESPN. A man known more for commercials and charisma than courtroom credibility. His fists clenched. It didn't matter. He had seen her. He had seen everything. And he wasn't about to let silence finish what betrayal had started. Not today. Not ever. Without wasting another second, he turned and ran past the sketchpad, down the slope, heart pounding like a war drum. Because somewhere beneath the lie, beneath the power, beneath the polished smiles of men like Charles Brooks, there was still a little girl fighting to be seen. And Shaq had just become the only one who could speak for her. Shaquille O'Neal's pulse hadn't come down. The sound of the wheels scraping against rock still echoed in his ears, playing on loop, each second punctuated by that deafening absence of sound. No cry, no shout, not even the panicked shuffle of a girl, realizing what was happening. Just a clean, deliberate silence. He reached the edge seconds after Charles Brooks disappeared behind the trees. The sky above had shifted, warmer now, tinged with light, but it did nothing to ease the cold spreading through Shaq's chest. He dropped to his knees, scanning the rocky cliffside with frantic urgency. The ground below was a chaotic mess of sharp stones and dry bramble, too steep for climbing, too dangerous for assumption. He looked down once more. A flicker of pink. There, tangled in the knot of tree roots and sharp stone, was Maya's scarf. Bright, defiant, caught like it refused to be erased. Just beneath it, her wheelchair tilted sideways, cradled in a crevice of roots and earth. It had lodged perfectly between two gnarled trunks, the kind of cruel luck that spared a body but offered no guarantees. And Maya, she wasn't moving. Not at first. Her head rested at an awkward angle. One arm slumped over the side. Her coat was torn, and from where Shaq was perched he couldn't see her face. Just the delicate rise and fall of her chest. A barely there flutter that meant everything. He shouted without meaning to. Maya! Maya, can you hear me? There was no reply, no stir. His voice disappeared into the cliffside and dissolved with the wind. But he saw it again, just a flicker, her fingers shifting, slow and weak. Shaq exhaled. That tiny movement might as well have been a scream. She was alive, hurt, silent, in shock, but alive. He stood and backed away from the ledge, thinking fast. Cell service up here was spotty at best. He'd left his truck down the trail, half a mile away. Going back would waste precious time. But staying here, frozen, would accomplish even less. He needed help. Not from the police. Not yet. They'd ask questions, make calls that could warn Charles Brooks long before any truth saw daylight. And Shaq knew power didn't just protect. It rewrote stories before they were even told. He pulled out his phone, raising it high. 1 bar, maybe 2. No signal strong enough to send a video, but enough to dial. He tapped a number burned into his memory, the one he hadn't called in years. James Halliday answered on the third ring. Shaq? James. I need your help. It's urgent. I'm on Blackridge Bluff. I just saw a man push a little girl in a wheelchair off the edge. There was silence on the line, but Shaq could hear the tension brewing. What? She's alive, Shaq added quickly. She's caught. Not much time. And the man, he hesitated, knowing how insane it would sound. The man was Charles Brooks. James cursed under his breath. I watched him do it. He didn't hesitate. James didn't ask if he was serious. Didn't ask if Shaq was misreading what he saw. He only said, I'm on my way. Don't let her out of your sight. Shaq ended the call and turned back toward the drop. Maya hadn't moved again, and a part of him feared that flicker had been the last. But no. She'd made it this far. If she was strong enough to survive the fall, she was strong enough to hang on just a little longer. He jogged down the path to where his SUV waited. The vehicle's trunk popped open with a hiss, revealing the survival kit he always carried: first aid, rope, gloves, and a heavy-duty flashlight. He slung the backpack over his shoulder and sprinted back up the incline, breath short but steady. His size made speed a challenge, but his urgency didn't allow for excuses. 10 minutes later, James's rusted old Jeep groaned up the trail. Shaq flagged him down, motioning him to park behind a screen of trees. James stepped out with a canvas messenger bag and years of fight in his bones. He looked older than Shaq remembered, grayer, leaner, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. They didn't waste time. She's here, Shaq said, guiding him to the edge. Right there, halfway down. Caught in the roots. I don't think she's conscious anymore. James leaned over, squinting into the steep drop. Jesus. He stepped back, swallowing hard. We need someone who knows rescue protocols. Climbing. Extraction. Shaq nodded. I know someone. Pete Collier. Former Army medic. He runs the veterans shelter outside town. Owes me a favor. James didn't ask why. Call him. Shaq dialed. Pete picked up fast and after a 10-second explanation said, I'll be there in 15. While they waited, James pulled out a notebook and began scribbling. Tell me everything you saw. I need the timeline. Details. Anything that proves this wasn't an accident. Shaq walked him through the moment, from the way Charles had pushed Maya's wheelchair, to the words "one last time," to the eerie calm with which he left. James scribbled like his life depended on it. By the time Pete arrived, the light had changed again, brighter, but no less cold. Pete didn't waste time with pleasantries. He surveyed the bluff, nodded once, and unpacked his gear: ropes, harness, anchors. Quiet, efficient, practice. Won't be easy, Pete muttered, but she's small. If the roots hold, I can bring her up. But we don't get a second shot. If this gets botched, she falls. Shaq's jaw tightened. Then we don't botch it. Pete roped in. Shaq and James anchored the other end, digging their boots into the gravel, eyes locked on every inch of slack. Pete descended slowly, carefully, whispering into a small comm mic attached to his vest. His voice was low and calm, breaking the static. I see her, Pete said. She's breathing, weak, but steady. Got bruising to the forehead. Chairs wedged tight, not much time. The next minutes crawled by like hours. Every shift in rope made Shaq's hands twitch. Every rustle below had him imagining the worst. He didn't speak. He couldn't. His entire body was clenched in prayer, though he wasn't the praying type. Then Pete's voice came through again. She's harnessed. Coming up. Shaq and James pulled with measured effort, coordinating with Pete's upward momentum. As the first signs of the harness appeared, Shaq moved forward, arms out. Pete's hand emerged next, gripping the ledge, and then finally, Maya. She was limp, pale. Blood smeared one side of her face, but her chest rose, and her head lolled slightly, as Pete cradled her across the edge. James knelt beside her, checking her pulse. She's alive, he said. We need to move. Now. Shaq wrapped Maya in the emergency blanket from his bag. His arms were gentle, careful, as if carrying something sacred. As he turned toward the trees, James placed a hand on his shoulder. You just saved her life. Shaq didn't reply. He was already walking. They didn't go to the hospital right away. Not yet. Too risky. James knew a private doctor on the edge of town. A man who owed him more than a few favors. They could assess her there. Stabilize her. Buy time. As they drove, Maya stirred in the back seat. Her eyes fluttered. Her lips parted, then closed again. Shaq looked back from the passenger seat. Hang in there, baby girl, he said softly. We're not gonna let them erase you. When they arrived, the doctor ushered them in with urgency, and no questions. IV fluids, oxygen, a mild sedative. As the machines beeped and the air filled with sterile calm, Shaq finally stepped out into the hallway. James followed. She'll pull through, he said. But we've got a bigger storm coming. Shaq nodded. Let it come. I'll be standing right here. And he meant it, because silence had almost buried a child alive. And now it was his voice that would make sure the world heard her scream, even if she never got the chance. Shaq stood in the center of the living room, phone in one hand, a folded letter in the other. The letter, hand-delivered by an anonymous courier just 2 hours earlier, contained 3 typed paragraphs and one name. Charles Brooks. Lucille watched her son carefully from the sofa, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes, once quick with fire, were now slow with concern. Shawnee stood nearby, arms crossed, searching her husband's face for the version of him she knew best, the one that didn't get shaken. But this Shaq was different. He hadn't spoken for nearly 5 minutes since reading the letter out loud. Then, finally, he broke the silence. He was there that night, Shaq said, voice low. At the youth center. I knew the place was crooked. We all did. But I never thought he'd be part of it. Brooks. He wasn't just funding it. He owned it. Lucille didn't flinch. Her gaze narrowed. You're sure? She asked. He nodded. I saw the receipts, wire transfers, names, dates. Enough to bury him. Shawnee took a slow step forward. But enough to bury you too. Shaq hesitated, then met her eyes. That's what I'm afraid of. Lucille stood and walked toward him, every step slow and measured. You know what they'll say. That you're doing this to stay relevant, to sell something, to smear a good man. He's not a good man, Shaq said sharply. He's a manipulator. He's been laundering money through community programs and buying silence from the same kids he pretends to protect. And now, someone finally slipped up. They gave me a crack. I can't ignore it. Shawnee exchanged a worried glance with Lucille. Both women knew, once Shaq set his mind on something, he didn't let go. But this wasn't a game, or a championship. This was war, and the battlefield was invisible. Shaq pulled out his phone again, and dialed the number he hadn't used in 10 years. It rang twice. Still alive or just nostalgic? A gravelly voice answered. Shaq exhaled, the corners of his mouth twitching into a brief smile. James Halliday. Still as dramatic as ever. You only call me when things get biblical. So who's Goliath this time? Charles Brooks. Silence. Then James said, hell. Shaq nodded. Exactly. James was quiet for a long time. Then, you know I'm disbarred, right? I'm not asking for a courtroom. Shaq replied. I'm asking for your mind, your memory. You saw him rise when we were all still climbing. You know the bodies under his throne. James sighed. Problem is, no one cares what I know, or what you know. You think this city wants to see Brooks fall? He built their schools, paid for their hospitals, speaks at universities, has a scholarship fund with your name on it. Shaq rubbed his temple. I don't care if it takes my name down too. If I stay quiet, I'm no better. Shawnee stepped closer, lowering her voice. But if you speak out, you risk everything. Your legacy, your career, the people who trust you. If you make this public, it'll destroy you before it touches him. Lucille, silent until now, finally spoke. They'll call it a lie. A performance. A desperate man's stunt. James added grimly, and they'll say, why now? Why after all these years? Why speak up once the spotlight has dimmed? Shaq looked out the window, watching a group of boys play basketball on the street corner. Their laughter rang out like echoes from another life. A younger version of him. A purer one. I know what they'll say, he murmured. But I also know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt, and I can't unsee it. James's voice softened. Then you better armor up. Because Charles Brooks isn't just a man. He's an institution. You don't just accuse him. You don't even whisper his name, unless you're ready for the fallout. I am, Shaq said. James was unconvinced. You say that now. But the first time they spin your story on cable news, when your name becomes a punchline, When even your teammates start to distance themselves, will you still be ready? Shawnee's voice cracked. This isn't a game, Shaq. This could end us. Lucille stepped between them. Then he needs to decide. Right here. Right now. The room was still. Tense. Charged like a storm cloud. Pregnant with lightning. Shaq closed his eyes. I used to think silence was safe. That if I kept my head down, the world would leave me alone. But silence only protects power, not people. James was quiet on the line. Then he said, there's a woman. Amanda Cross. Investigative journalist. Still has a backbone. I'll reach out. She might listen. If you've got proof. I've got more than proof, Shaq said. I've got memory. I've got history. That's not enough, James replied. Not anymore. Click. The call ended. Shawnee sat down, burying her face in her hands. Do you know what you're starting? I'm starting the truth, he said. Lucille gave a quiet nod. Then make sure you finish it. That night, while the city outside hummed with its usual disinterest, Shaq sat alone in his study. The room was lined with trophies, jerseys, framed magazine covers, his past immortalized in glossy glass and wood. But tonight, none of it mattered. He stared at the folder on his desk. Documents, photos, names, dates, and at the center of it all, a smiling, silver-haired man, giving a speech to a group of teenagers, the face of Charles Brooks. Shaq whispered to himself, they won't believe me. And still, he reached for a pen and began to write. Not a confession, not a tell-all, a declaration, a burden finally spoken aloud. Pete Collier hadn't touched a climbing harness in 6 years. Not since Kabul. Not since the explosion that shattered half his platoon, and the truth he brought home with him, that the real battles didn't end with discharge papers. But tonight, strapped into gear that still smelled faintly of adrenaline and gun oil, Pete wasn't a medic. He was a ghost with a mission. They waited at the edge of the bluff, wind cutting sharp and low through the narrow canyon below. The moon was fractured behind a blanket of clouds, giving just enough light to see, but not to be seen. Shaq stood behind Pete, both gloved hands gripping the anchor rope, arms braced like iron beams against the tremble of the descent. His feet were dug into the earth, back straight, breathing steady. Every muscle in his body was a tether to the man lowering himself into the dark unknown. James crouched nearby, holding binoculars, scanning for any sign of movement across the ravine. The drop below was treacherous, not deep enough to kill, but long enough to bury. The only path down was the one Pete was carving with each cautious step and knot. Lucille stayed in the SUV, radio in hand, watching the minutes bleed away like oil in water. She didn't speak. She didn't pray. She just listened. Pete's voice crackled over the earpiece. 30 feet down. Found the ledge. I see her. James froze. Alive? Pause. Barely. Below, Maya Hayes lay curled against the cold limestone wall, limbs twisted in unnatural angles, her face a pale blur beneath a curtain of dirt-caked hair. But her chest moved. Barely. Pete dropped to one knee beside her, checked her vitals, murmuring to himself as muscle memory took over. He unhooked a compact IV pouch, pressed a warming pack to her neck, and adjusted her arms as gently as possible. She didn't speak. Her eyes flickered, fluttered, but did not focus. Still, her hand flinched at his touch. There was something there. A thread of life, however fragile. She's got a pulse. Weak. No visible fractures, but she's dehydrated. Hypothermic. We need to get her up now. Shaq's knuckles whitened around the rope. Ready. James leaned forward. Go slow. We only get one shot. Pete secured the harness around Maya's torso, cinching it tight against her frail frame. Then, with one last glance at the dead cliffside, he clicked the carabiner into place and spoke softly. Hang on, kid. You're not invisible anymore. Above, Shaq heaved. The rope tensed. Inch by inch, foot by foot, the two figures began to rise. Awkward and uneven. The weight unbalanced. James moved in instinctively, checking tension, guiding slack, eyes trained on the cliff's edge, every second stretched like taffy, the drop below a constant threat they refused to name. Pete's voice cut through the static. Almost there. Shaq's legs trembled under the strain, not from weakness but from control. He didn't flinch. He didn't falter. He'd built his body to dominate courts, to absorb impact, to intimidate. But tonight, all that strength served one purpose: to lift a girl the world had forgotten. Finally, Pete's hand appeared over the ledge. Then the harness. then Maya. James reached first, pulling the girl's shoulders up and over the bluff. Lucille was there before the dust settled, laying a blanket over her and placing 2 fingers on her neck, her face calm but alert. She's stable, but she won't speak. Not yet. Pete hoisted himself over the edge last, hands scraped, breath ragged. He collapsed backward, staring at the sky. You ever do this again? He gasped. You bring a winch? Shaq didn't laugh. Just looked down at Maya, silent, blinking, curled like a question no one wanted to ask. James stood, brushing dirt from his knees. She knew something. That's why they dumped her here. They didn't want her dead. They wanted her forgotten. Shaq stared into the dark beyond the bluff, as if the truth was still lurking in the valley. She's not going to be forgotten. Lucille nodded. Not anymore. The team moved as one, not practiced, but precise. Pete prepared an IV and glucose kit from the emergency pack. Lucille found warmth packs and pressed them gently along Maya's spine. James monitored the route back to the highway, checking for tailing vehicles or drones. Shaq sat beside Maya, his presence a wall of calm in the middle of chaos. She stirred. Just once. Her lips parted. A breath escaped. Shaq leaned in, barely breathing. But she said nothing. Just stared. Not at him. Through him. By the time they reached the safe house, an old farm on the outskirts of the city, long abandoned, now wired with motion sensors and blackout blinds, the storm had finally broken. Rain lashed the windows like fingers desperate to get in. Inside, Maya was wrapped in thermal blankets, hooked to an IV, sleeping in a shallow rhythm that hovered between recovery and trauma. James stood in the doorway, watching the storm. She saw something, that much is obvious. But she won't talk until she knows we won't use her. Pete leaned against the wall, arms crossed. She's seen enough people weaponize truth. She needs to see someone protect it. Shaq sat at the edge of the room, elbows on knees, staring at the floor. They hurt her without ever touching her, he said quietly. They took her voice and made the world pretend it never existed. Lucille entered with a bowl of soup, her hands steady. Then we give it back, slowly, carefully, one piece at a time. James turned. We're exposed now. Once they know she's not where they left her, they'll come looking. Shaq looked up, then let them come. Pete chuckled dryly. You think this is about defiance? We're not dealing with a corporation. We're dealing with a myth. Charles Brooks isn't just a man. He's a system. You can't punch that. I'm not trying to punch it, Shaq said. I'm trying to reveal it. Lucille set the soup down beside Maya's bed. Then we need proof. Patterns. Connections. And we need people who still believe in accountability. James raised an eyebrow. You know any of those left? Pete shrugged. There's always someone. And for the first time since the descent, Shaq looked around the room and realized they were no longer alone. Not just in body, but in belief. Each of them had something to lose. And yet, here they were. James, a man who once stood before senators and judges, now a ghost among the disbarred. Pete, a medic turned recluse, bearing invisible wounds deeper than the canyon they'd just escaped. Lucille, a mother who'd once watched the world mock her son's dreams, still holding her ground like the spine of a nation. And him, the athlete, the celebrity, the walking contradiction. Together they were not an army. They were a spark, a resistance, not born in fire but in silence broken. Morning crept in, slow and unwelcome. Maya was awake, staring out the dusty window at a tree, stripped bare by the storm. She hadn't spoken, but her eyes had shifted, no longer lost, no longer numb. Lucille approached slowly, setting a mug of tea beside her. You don't have to talk, she said, but when you're ready, we'll be here. Maya didn't nod, didn't flinch, but her hand moved, just slightly, toward the tea. It was enough. By noon a plan had formed. Shaq drew diagrams. James opened encrypted folders from his old archives. Pete mapped potential safe houses. Lucille contacted a trusted nurse to run blood panels quietly. Every move had risk, but every second they waited was a second Maya's silence could be misused, twisted, erased, or turned into someone else's narrative. Shaq stood at the center of the room, all eyes on him. We don't need to scream. We don't need to threaten. We just need to show the truth, and make sure they can't bury it again. James added, but we do it smart. Controlled leaks, verified sources, witness protection fallback plans. Pete leaned in. And most importantly, we keep her human, not a symbol, not a tool, just Maya. Lucille smiled. Faint but real. It starts with believing her. Shaq looked toward the back room, where Maya now slept. And for the first time, the silence in the house felt full, not empty. A new kind of quiet. The kind that comes before a storm. The right kind. The kind that changes everything. Charles Brooks sat in his high-rise office, encased in floor-to-ceiling glass that turned the skyline into a portrait of authority. The city below churned with its usual pace, horns, sirens, footsteps, but none of it touched him. Not really. His office was quiet, soundproof, curated, the kind of quiet money buys, the kind that knows how to wait. A call came in. A single vibration, no ringtone, just a name on the screen. Creston Logistics. His contact at the site. He answered with one word. Well, a tight voice replied. She made it. The team pulled her out. She's not dead. For a moment, Charles said nothing. He blinked once, then slowly leaned forward and placed the phone on the desk. His eyes narrowed. How public? Not yet. Small circle, but someone will talk. It's just a matter of time. Charles reached into the drawer and removed a crisp manila folder. Inside was a forged disappearance report filed days earlier, time-stamped, notarized, and designed to frame Maya's vanishing as a runaway, signed by a doctor who no longer practiced, and a social worker who no longer existed. He stared at it for a moment, then picked up the heavy gold lighter from the corner of the desk. With practiced calm, he flicked it to life, held the flame against the report, and watched it curl into ash. Move the schedule up, he said, voice cold. I go on air tonight. The news dropped just before the evening broadcast. Charles Brooks to make statement on missing youth center intern. The phrasing was clinical, sterile, but inside the newsroom, anchors scrambled, producers huddled, and cue cards were rewritten within minutes. At exactly 7:03 p.m., Charles sat across from the host of The Nation Speaks. The studio lights warmed his carefully somber expression. He wore a dark suit with a purple tie, the color of mourning. His hands were clasped. His voice was low, paced, deliberate. She was like a daughter to me, Charles said, his tone etched with practiced grief. We all failed Maya, especially me. I trusted the wrong people. And now, he looked away, eyes misting. Now I can only pray for her safety, wherever she is. The host nodded with solemn sympathy. You believe she's still out there? I believe in second chances, Charles said, even for those who think they're saving her when they're only putting her in more danger. The next question was surgical. Do you think this operation, this cliffside extraction, was an act of heroism or recklessness? Charles didn't hesitate. It was unauthorized, dangerous, misguided. I don't question their hearts, but I question their judgment. We have laws, institutions. We don't need vigilantes. And with that, the flip began. The headlines the next morning hit like shrapnel. Shaquille O'Neal linked to legal rescue attempt. Former NBA star acts outside jurisdiction. Brooks speaks. I mourn her too. Maya Hayes. Still missing. Still silent. Shaq stared at the television in the safe house. Jaw clenched, the screen flickering in the reflection of the window. The room behind him had gone quiet. Lucille flipped the channel, but every station was running it. Every network had grabbed a piece. James stood in the doorway, holding a legal pad filled with notes that now felt obsolete. He didn't just spin it. He rewrote it. Pete shook his head, arms folded. Guy torched the evidence and built a shrine to the lie. Maya sat silently on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. She hadn't spoken since the descent. Her eyes were clearer, but her voice remained somewhere distant, locked in a memory still too raw to reach for. Shaq turned off the TV. They're backing off, James said. 3 sponsors dropped you this morning. 2 more are reevaluating affiliations. I've had 6 calls from old contacts asking if this is a publicity stunt. If you're trying to defame Brooks. Shaq looked at him. You believe that? I don't, James said. But they do. Shawnee called an hour later. Her voice trembled, not with fear but frustration. They're dragging you through this like you're the threat. I've got people messaging me like you've lost your mind, asking if this is some midlife crisis. It's not, Shaq said simply. I know that. But they're not listening. You know what this looks like? I know what it is. Lucille walked into the room with a manila envelope in hand. They sent this to the house. No return address. Inside were surveillance photos. Grainy, black and white, time-stamped, images of Maya. The rescue. Pete on the bluff. James loading gear into the SUV. Shaq holding the rope. All from angles no one remembered seeing a camera. He's watching us, James muttered. Not just fighting the narrative. He's recording his own. Pete paced. We can't go public. Not yet. Not while he controls the stage. Shaq stood in the center of the room. Still, focused, unshaken. I didn't sign up for silence, he said. I signed up to protect her. Lucille nodded. Then do it wisely. The world's watching now, but they're watching through his lens. You want them to see you? Change the lens. Later that night, Shaq sat beside Maya again. The safe house was quiet. Rain tapped softly at the window. You don't have to say anything, he murmured. But I want you to know. They're not after me. They're after your silence. Because they're scared of what it might become. Maya didn't move. Shaq leaned back in the chair. When I was young, I thought power looked like trophies. Contracts. Headlines. But real power. It's when someone speaks and the world has to listen. That's what you've got. Whether you want it or not. She turned her head slightly. The first motion she'd made in hours. You're not alone, he said. Not anymore. Still no words. But something had shifted. A softening. A recognition. The resistance wasn't in hiding anymore. It had simply gone quiet. The kind of quiet that waits for its moment to strike back with truth. By the next day, James had built a private link with Amanda Cross, the investigative journalist they'd kept at arm's length until now. She was skeptical, but not cynical. A rare I've seen the show Brooks runs, Amanda said over a secure line. Polished lies, neatly gift-wrapped. But I need more than suspicion. I need documents, testimony, something that cracks the illusion. We've got Maya, James said. Amanda was silent. The girl no one can find. She's here. Safe. Alive. That's not proof. That's a headline. She'll talk, James promised. Just not yet. Amanda sighed. Then call me when she does. But don't wait too long. He's building a wall of narrative. Once it sets, it'll take a demolition team to break it. Pete walked in as the call ended. We need leverage. Something he can't explain away with a press conference. Shaq pointed to the files Lucille had been organizing. Youth Center grant forms, payment ledgers, falsified identities. Still disorganized but damning. Pieces of a puzzle they were finally starting to see. Then we build it. Brick by brick. 2 days later, the team had a wall, covered in documents, photos, maps, red strings connected names to dates, faces to fund transfers, backroom deals to political donations. It was messier than they wanted, but it was real, tangible, and Maya, still silent, began standing in the doorway during their sessions, listening, watching. She wasn't hiding anymore. Shaq noticed, and so did James. She's getting ready, James said. You'll know when. Shaq nodded. We wait, but we don't stop. By the end of the week, Charles Brooks stood behind a podium at a city gala, surrounded by donors and dignitaries. Cameras flashed. Applause rose. He smiled like grief still lived in his pocket. The children of this city deserve protectors, not performers. Safety, not stunts. It sounded noble. It sounded final. But across the city, in the quiet of a small farm safe house, a girl who was once discarded like a secret sat down at a table, pulled a notepad toward her, and wrote one word. Ready. Shaq read it, and didn't speak. He just nodded. Because the next chapter didn't belong to Charles anymore. It belonged to the voice they couldn't silence. Hospitals always carried a hymn, quiet, mechanical, and inescapably sterile. It was the kind of place where stories either ended or began again. In the corner room of the 7th floor, Maya Hayes stared at the pale blue ceiling, her body still but her mind racing through a maze of vanishing walls. There was no television, no music, just the beep of the heart monitor, and the rhythmic exhale of machines doing what her voice had not yet dared to do exist out loud. It was Lucille who first noticed the disappearance. She'd called the school district for Maya's transcripts. Nothing. No ID, no enrollment history. Then she checked adoption records, state logs, social service filings, even her last known tax forms gone. Every trace of Maya's past had evaporated like smoke in sunlight. James confirmed it within hours. It's not a data error. It's a full-scale erasure. Like she was never registered to breathe. Pete checked deeper, cross-referencing internal records from his old contacts in medical response. No ER visits under her name. No clinic files. No social security footprint. It was like someone had reached into every archive and rewound her existence. When Shaq walked into her hospital room that night, he already knew, and he carried the weight of it in his silence. Maya didn't look at him at first. Her eyes were half open, unfocused, as if afraid to settle on anything too real. But she wasn't asleep. Not entirely. He sat beside her bed and waited. He didn't speak, didn't touch her hand or break the rhythm of the machines. He just existed with her. Quietly, patiently. It was Maya who finally whispered. Did they really do it? Her voice was brittle, barely a breath. Erase me? Shaq exhaled. They tried. Her lips trembled as she turned her head toward him. Why? Because the easiest way to silence someone, he said slowly, is to convince the world they were never there to begin with. She didn't cry, not this time, but her fingers curled into the bedsheet, slowly gathering it like a thread she could anchor herself to. Do you think, she asked, I was meant to be forgotten? Shaq didn't answer right away. He looked at her, not the wires, not the bandages, but her, and shook his head. No, he said. You were meant to be found. Maya blinked hard. That was the first time anyone had said that to her. Not that she mattered, but that she wasn't wrong to exist in the first place. Outside the room, James and Lucille stood at the nurse's station, watching a technician re-enter Maya's biometric data into a temporary system. It was an unofficial fix, one that wouldn't survive another purge. But for now, it kept her in the system. She's legally a ghost, James muttered. No school, no guardianship, no home address, no history. They made sure she doesn't exist. And if she doesn't exist, anything she says can be dismissed. Lucille stared at the monitor. Then we make the world see her. The next morning, Maya sat upright, her blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The IV still fed into her arm, but she was no longer just surviving. She was present, watching, listening. She didn't flinch when Pete entered with a tablet, though she stiffened when he pulled up the screen. These were the documents from your case file, Pete said gently. We backed them up last month. They're gone now, wiped. But we've got the timestamps, proof they existed. Maya leaned in, silent, studying the digital footprints. The files were blurred thumbnails now, corrupted by whatever back-end attack had erased them. But metadata remained. It was enough to prove she hadn't imagined her own past. There's more, Pete added. Your foster records were tampered with long before you disappeared. Transfers that never went through. Signatures that weren't yours. James entered next, holding a printout. And this, your name on a court hearing docket. 2 years ago. It says you were relocated for safety reasons. Except the court clerk swears this session never happened. Maya didn't speak, but her fingers clenched around the edge of the blanket. They were hiding you, Lucille said gently. Then when you got too close to the truth, they erased you. Why me? Maya asked softly. No one answered right away. Then Shaq stepped forward. Because you saw what they didn't want anyone else to see. And because you remembered. Her voice wavered. I didn't ask for this. No one does, Lucille said. But when you survive what others don't, you carry more than just memory. You carry the proof. Later that day, Amanda Cross arrived at the hospital, under strict instructions. No cameras, no questions. Just a voice recorder, and a willingness to listen. Maya met her with guarded eyes and unspoken terms. Amanda didn't push. I'm not here to make you famous, she said. I'm here to make sure you're not erased again. It took a full hour before Maya spoke. Her voice was halting, rough-edged, but real. I worked in the youth center for 7 months. I thought it was just paperwork, scheduling. But then I started noticing changes. Names on the sign-in sheets that never showed up. Checks issued to programs that didn't exist. And one day I followed one of the trucks that came every Friday. It didn't go to a shelter. It went to a private warehouse. Amanda's face stayed still, but her recorder light blinked steadily. I asked one of the other girls, Maya continued, if she noticed anything weird. That night she didn't come back. They said she got transferred, but she left her shoes, her phone charger, her bracelet. Her breath caught. I tried to report it. First to the center director, then to the city office. 2 weeks later, my records started vanishing. My foster parents stopped answering. Then someone tried to move me, said it was a safety protocol, but they didn't take me to a shelter. They took me to a holding house. With no windows. Amanda whispered. And how did you escape? I didn't. Maya said. I got pushed. The room fell silent. Amanda stopped the recorder. You don't have to say more today. This is enough. Maya nodded slowly, retreating back into her silence, but not as far this time. That night, the team gathered in the hospital lounge. Amanda confirmed what they feared. Brooks had connections in the court clerk's office, child services, even the State Health Records Bureau. He'd built a lattice of influence designed not just to profit, but to vanish those who got too close. He's not laundering money, Amanda said. He's laundering people. James leaned back in his chair. And now we've got the testimony to prove it. But we can't release it yet, Pete cautioned. Not while she's still exposed. Lucille stood with her arms crossed, looking out over the city lights. So we protect her, and we prepare. Because the moment this goes public, it won't be a debate. It'll be a war of narratives. Shaq walked to the door, quiet but certain. Then we give her the platform, but on her terms, not his. The next morning, Maya's name returned to the hospital system. James had filed an emergency reinstatement, using a loophole buried deep in medical rights statutes. It wouldn't last forever, but it was a start. And across the city, in offices lined with polished awards and news clippings, Charles Brooks sat watching a blurry hospital surveillance image, delivered to his desk, Maya sitting up, alert, surrounded, still alive, still speaking. He crushed the photo in his hand, his fingers curling with quiet rage. And somewhere deep in the foundations of the system he built, a crack had begun to form, one born not of force, but of memory that refused to die. In the silence of the hospital room, Maya watched the rain fall against the window. Her face was calm now, not at peace, but no longer in hiding. Shaq sat beside her again. Same chair, same steady presence. They tried to take everything, she said. They didn't, he replied. You're still here. Maya looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. What if I forget myself? Shaq leaned forward, eyes unwavering. Then we'll remind you. Every time. And this time she smiled. Just a little. But it was enough. The ballroom at the Mayfield Civic Center was dressed in its usual grandeur, velvet ropes, polished brass, crystal chandeliers, refracting light over a sea of tailored suits and camera flashes. A banner stretched across the stage, in bold navy. Restoring trust, a community conversation with Charles Brooks. Reporters circled the room like bees before bloom, whispering predictions, placing bets, not on whether Charles would win the narrative war, but by how much. At precisely 6:00 p.m., the music softened, and Charles Brooks stepped into the spotlight. He wore a soft gray suit, no tie, just the right touch of humility. His smile, shaped for sympathy, scanned the room like a pastor entering his pulpit. I want to begin by thanking you all for standing with our city, he said, voice calm and measured. In these times of noise and chaos, I believe in gathering, in unity, in truth. A ripple of camera flashes punctuated his words. He placed his hands on the podium and continued. Already rehearsed. Already winning. I have been accused, not formally, not legally, but publicly, of things unthinkable. These attacks are not just on me, they are on our community, on the very people we serve. And while I understand the pain driving such narratives, I must remind you, words without evidence are just wind. Then came the pause, the pivot. Let us remember who we are. Let us reject spectacle. Let us reject. The back doors opened. No announcement. No warning. Shaquille O'Neal walked into the room. Beside him, James Halliday, Irene Douglas, a former district social worker who once flagged the youth center's accounting discrepancies, and Pete Collier, ex-medic, carrying a binder thick with redacted files and time-stamped reports. But it wasn't the team that silenced the room. It was the girl behind them. Pink scarf, braces, eyes wide, but walking tall. Maya Hayes. The flashbulbs lit like a lightning storm. Gasps rippled. Charles froze, his hands still on the podium, eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly, but only for a second. Shaq kept walking. He didn't march. He moved with calm purpose, a mountain in motion. When he reached the lower step of the stage, he looked toward the panel moderator, a startled woman clutching her clipboard, and said simply, 1 minute. She didn't argue, just stepped aside. Charles didn't move. Shaq took the podium. Not the mic, the podium. The room held its breath. My name is Shaquille O'Neal, he said, but I'm not here tonight as a celebrity, or an athlete, or a headline. He glanced back toward Maya, who stood with Lucille just off stage, one hand gripping the hem of her sweater, the other clenched gently at her side. "I'm here as a father," Shaq said. "Not biologically, but by choice, by responsibility. Because when a child is harmed and the world decides it's easier to look away, someone has to look toward." A murmur ran through the back row. "I saw him," Shaq continued, eyes locking on Charles. "I saw what he did. Not with fists, not with violence, with signatures, with silence, with power misused." Charles's voice cut in then, smooth and practiced. "Mr. O'Neal, I understand grief." "No, you don't," Shaq said. "You understand control, and you're about to lose it." The room tightened. Press badges twitched. Recorders clicked. Then, quietly, from behind the curtain, Maya stepped forward. Not pushed. Not pulled. She walked. The pink scarf caught a hint of breeze from the air vent above, fluttering like a signal. Her braces caught the light. Her eyes didn't search for safety. They searched for confirmation. Shaq stepped back. Maya took the mic. And the room shifted. "I was never lost," she said. One sentence. One bullet. Through the silence. "I was erased." She looked toward Charles. His expression had returned to neutral, but the veins along his jaw were tight, locked. "I worked in your center. I saw the fake programs, the trucks. I followed one. I saw what was inside. No one moved. No one blinked." Maya's voice shook, just once. "But it didn't stop. You smiled when you did it. When I asked questions, you told me I was imagining things. Then my file disappeared. Then I disappeared." A reporter raised her hand. Instinct, not interruption. "Do you have proof?" Maya stepped back. Pete came forward, handed a tablet to the nearest tech team. Within seconds, the large display screen behind the stage lit up. Images, timestamps, signatures, security footage from the youth center hallways, a freeze frame of Maya standing at a locked supply room door, another of her name in the deleted file queue, a flagged email exchange between caseworkers. Irene Douglas took the second mic. "I filed 3 complaints about that youth center. They vanished. So did my job. But I kept the copies." James followed. "Brooks used community grants to mask black budget payments to subcontractors who didn't exist. The laundering wasn't for money. It was for people. Placement agencies. Behavior modification units. Quiet facilities with no names." The screen shifted. More documents. Pete's overlays. Stolen medical records. A forged court relocation notice. Every time a child got close, Pete added, they were reassigned, reclassified, and eventually, deleted. Charles raised a hand, the gesture of a man still believing he held the room. "I know what this looks like," he said, tone calm. "But stories are not evidence. These are wounded people. Confused, misled. I have dedicated my life to service. You've dedicated your life to vanishing those who threaten your image." Shaq cut in. "You don't help the system, you are the system." The crowd erupted, not in shouts but in noise. Tension broke like a dam. Journalists jostled for better shots. Phones shot skyward. Cameramen pivoted lenses from Charles to Maya. From Maya to Shaq. From the truth to the man trying to outrun it. Charles stepped away from the podium, hand still raised, but not waving. Shielding. And in that moment, Maya did something no one expected. She smiled. Not in triumph. In freedom. The kind of smile that says you didn't win. Later the footage would go viral. News anchors would replay it frame by frame. Analysts would dissect Charles's expression. But the truth didn't live in the media storm. It lived in that single moment, when a girl with no records, no address, and no voice walked into a room that wasn't built for her, and spoke. When she walked out of that ballroom, the reporters chased her. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She turned to one of them and said, "Ask me what they did. Don't ask me why I waited." And just like that, the narrative flipped. That night, at the safe house, James shut down the live feed, his hands trembling for the first time in weeks. "We did it," he said. "No," Shaq replied, staring out the window. "She did." Lucille poured tea, steady and proud. "And now we build what comes next." Pete leaned back in his chair. "You think he'll come after us now?" James answered without turning around. "He already did." "But now?" Shaq said. "Now he's the one hiding." And for the first time in a long time, the lie didn't just crack. It shattered. The federal courthouse stood like a fortress against the downtown skyline. its facade grim, windows too narrow for beauty, too wide for comfort. Security was doubled at the doors. Cameramen packed the sidewalk like vultures in neckties. Inside, the tension crackled beneath the hum of fluorescent lighting, thick with whispered judgment. Charles Brooks sat at the defendant's table in a dark navy suit. No tie, posture straight but rigid. The color in his cheeks had faded since the press conference. His eyes, once assured and surgical, now shifted with subtle restraint. Around him sat two attorneys, sharp, polished, and increasingly quiet. The courtroom buzzed with familiar names: state investigators, former donors, nonprofit leaders, social workers. The witness list had leaked the night before. But what pulled the crowd was not the case against Charles. It was the faces of those who had made silence bend. Maya Hayes sat in the first row behind the prosecution, pink scarf folded neatly in her lap, a navy blazer too big for her shoulders, draped over a white blouse. She didn't look like a hero. She didn't want to. She wanted to look real. Shaquille O'Neal arrived 10 minutes before proceedings began. Ducking the cameras, head lowered, he wore a plain black suit, no fanfare, no entourage, just presence and purpose. Assistant District Attorney Marcus Fielding stood at the front of the courtroom, pacing in small, measured circles. He had been known once for closing corruption cases in political circles, but nothing in his past resembled this. This wasn't just corruption. It was erasure. Systematic, deliberate. When the bailiff called the room to order, silence fell like a curtain. Then, opening statements began. Fielding walked to the center. No theatrics, just gravity. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "this is not a case about money. It is not about politics or even broken institutions. This case is about power, the kind that doesn't need to raise its voice to destroy you." He paused, eyes scanning each juror, as if weighing their silence. For years, Charles Brooks sat at the head of youth initiatives, charities, and reform panels, and behind every ribbon-cutting ceremony, he orchestrated a quiet empire of falsified records, laundered placements, and ghost files. Children, real children, vanished, legally, neatly, discreetly. He stepped closer to the jury box. One girl survived, not because of a policy, not because the system saved her, but because someone big enough stood in the way. She was almost buried by silence. But instead, today she speaks. The court recorder's keys clicked softly, preserving every word. Across the aisle, Charles's lead attorney stood and began a calm rebuttal. He framed the charges as circumstantial, labeled the witnesses as confused, referred to Maya as a troubled teen seeking clarity in the fog of trauma. He invoked charity, contribution, and public service. His voice was steady, but in the back of the courtroom, no one leaned in to listen. The first witness was Irene Douglas. She testified to flagged files, buried complaints, and unanswered emails. Her voice was firm but tired. "I saw the patterns," she said. "And then I saw my access revoked." Then came Pete Collier, his testimony precise. He spoke of missing logs, unnamed transport companies, and care facilities that weren't licensed anywhere. He didn't embellish. He didn't speculate. He just told the truth like a medic logging vitals after a trauma. Shaq was called next. He approached the stand with quiet control. No swagger, no show, just the weight of someone who carried what others abandoned. "Mr. O'Neal," the prosecutor asked, "why did you get involved?" Shaq leaned forward. "Because people were looking the other way. And she," he nodded toward Maya, "was still down there." "Down where?" "In the place people disappear into when power decides they don't matter." "Did you personally witness Mr. Brooks acting against the law?" "I witnessed him standing in the shadow of it, and using that shadow to hide things no child should ever have to survive." "Did you benefit from your involvement in this case?" "No," Shaq said. "I lost sponsors. I lost reputation. But I got something better. I got to be part of bringing someone home." There was no applause, no shift in expression, just stillness and resonance. Then came Maya. She walked to the witness stand alone, her scarf wrapped twice around her neck, her steps slow, deliberate. Every eye followed her, not in pity, but in reverence. She raised her right hand, swore her oath, and sat. Her voice was quiet at first. "I was 17 when I started working at the center. They told me it would be paperwork. I saw things that didn't make sense. Then I started asking." She paused. "They told me I was paranoid, that maybe I had mental health issues. that sometimes people don't understand how systems work. A slight shift from the defense table. One of the attorneys scribbled something down. Maya continued. One night I found a room full of files. Names, pictures, placements that didn't match the sign-in logs. Some of the kids on those files, I never saw them again. Her fingers curled around the wood of the witness box. I tried to tell someone, then my records disappeared. My foster moms stopped answering. They moved me, said it was for my safety. A single tear ran down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it. They didn't put me in another home. They put me in a holding place. No windows, cameras in every room, no clocks, just silence. Did you ever see Charles Brooks in that facility? Fielding asked. I saw him at the top of the stairs, looking down through the glass. He smiled. Gasps murmured from the back rows. The judge struck the gavel once, calm but clear. I thought I was hard to love, Maya said, turning to the jury. But I was just easy to ignore. And with that, she sat back, unshaken. The final day came fast. Charles Brooks did not take the stand. His attorneys filed a motion to dismiss, which was denied. Their final statement clung to community service and uncertain testimony. When the jury left for deliberation, the room exhaled for the first time in 3 days. It took them only 6 hours to return. The foreman stood. On the count of felony conspiracy, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of fraudulent concealment, guilty. On the count of systemic abuse under federal protective statutes, guilty. Charles did not speak. His attorneys nodded stiffly. The sentence was handed down the following morning. 35 years. Federal custody, no parole eligibility before 25. Outside, the news broke like thunder. Protesters didn't march. They waited, not for rage, but for confirmation that justice had finally echoed. Maya didn't speak to the press. She walked through the courthouse steps with Lucille on one side, and James on the other. Pete followed, shielding her from the crowd. Shaq stayed a few paces behind, watching, guarding. Reporters shouted questions, asked what it felt like to win. But it wasn't a win. It was a return. To memory. To self. To existence. That night, in the safe house living room, Maya sat beside Shaq, staring out the window. Do you think it's over? She asked. No, he said. But it's beginning. She smiled. Faint. I still feel invisible sometimes. Then we just have to keep reminding the world you're not. The room behind them filled with quiet laughter, soft tea being poured, documents packed away. The machine that had nearly swallowed Maya was broken now. Not dismantled, but cracked, exposed. And sometimes, that's how justice begins. Not with fire, but with one voice that refuses to be buried. The wind moved softly across the bluff, gentler now than it had been the day Maya first disappeared. The air carried a stillness that no longer felt like threat, but peace. The same ridge that had once been an edge between life and vanishing had become something else. A place returned, a space reclaimed. The narrow trail that led to the bluff's overlook had been cleared of brush, the ground beneath it leveled. A quiet gravel path winding through tall grass and wild juniper. The cliffside had not changed, but everything around it had. New fencing, a stone base with a short bronze rail, no signs of intrusion, only intention. Maya stood at the edge of the overlook, her feet planted firm, eyes scanning the horizon. The same cliff stretched before her, weathered, sun-bleached, and wide open. But this time, she wasn't beneath them. She wasn't being hauled up, limbs limp, throat silent. She was upright, present, seen. Shaq stood beside her, arms crossed lightly, eyes on the valley below. He didn't speak first. He knew the moment wasn't his to start or finish. He was there to witness, to accompany, to protect, still, but now without needing to carry. Maya exhaled slowly, her voice softer than the wind, but stronger than it had ever been. You ever think about how quiet it was that day? Shaq glanced sideways, the corners of his mouth tugging into the beginning of something thoughtful. Silence isn't always empty, he said. Sometimes it's just waiting for someone strong enough to speak. They stood that way for a moment, the former girl erased and the man who refused to let her stay invisible, both watching a landscape that had almost become her grave. Now it was something else entirely, a monument, a memory given back. Behind them, a small crowd gathered by the new railing. Pete stood with a half smile, arms behind his back. James wore his old college blazer, buttoned over a faded shirt, Lucille, ever still, ever grounded, held a single white flower in her hand, and near the stone base, where sunlight struck bronze with quiet dignity, a plaque read, "In honor of Maya Williams, for surviving what was meant to erase her." She didn't cry. Not here. Her tears had already been shed, in hospital rooms, courtrooms, and quiet nights where sleep came in fragments. This moment didn't ask for grief. It asked for remembrance, for power reclaimed without rage. "You remember what it sounded like when they pulled me up?" she asked. Shaq nodded, eyes ahead. "I remember the silence when we didn't know if you'd speak again." Maya took a step forward, just close enough to feel the breeze on her face. "I don't remember falling," she said. "I remember waking and hearing someone say, 'We've got you.' That was the first time I felt like maybe I wasn't disappearing." Shaq didn't speak. He didn't have to. His silence now wasn't the silence of helplessness. It was the silence of listening. The kind Maya had waited her whole life for. She turned back to the small gathering. Reporters were not allowed today. No press, no broadcasts. Just those who chose to see her, the same way they had when she had nothing to offer but the truth. She nodded once at Amanda Cross, who had stayed on the story even when the buzz died down, who had followed every off-record lead, with the steadiness of someone not chasing clout, but justice. Irene Douglas stepped forward quietly, placing a hand on Maya's shoulder. "You didn't just survive," Irene said. "You changed the ledger. You gave back every name they tried to erase." "I didn't do it alone," Maya replied. "No one ever does," James said. "But most people never stand at the front and tell the world they're still here." Maya touched the plaque gently with her fingertips. Her name had been misspelled on school forms, forgotten in court schedules, and deleted from digital systems. But here, it was cast in bronze. It was right, permanent, unignorable. Lucille handed her the white flower. Maya turned back toward the cliff and let it go. It drifted slowly, carried by the wind, not dropped, not thrown, just offered. The petals caught the sunlight before disappearing over the ridge, caught in the hush of the open air. "They said I was a mistake," she said, "that I was unstable, that I should forget." "They needed you to forget," Pete said. "It was the only way their story held." "But forgetting never felt right," she said. Shaq nodded. "Because your story never belonged to them." The breeze picked up slightly, tugging at the corners of her scarf. Maya looked younger in the sunlight, not small, not fragile, just unguarded. Her defenses, once built of silence, had given way to clarity. Not comfort, not ease, just the clean ache of truth finally spoken. Behind them, the others began walking back toward the trail. Pete and James carried the folded ceremony chairs. Lucille lingered last, her hand resting briefly on Maya's shoulder before following the others. Amanda snapped one final photo, not of the plaque but of Maya looking forward, then lowered her camera and disappeared behind the rise. Only Shaq and Maya remained. "You going to come back here?" he asked. "Maybe," she said, "but I don't need to." He turned to face her. "You sure? I used to think this place was the end of something," she said. "But now I think it's where I started." Shaq looked out over the valley. "That's the thing about cliffs. Most people only see the drop, but they're also the best place to see everything," she added. They stood there a moment longer, the silence between them now soft, earned, almost sacred. Then Maya turned toward the path and began to walk. Not fast, not slow, just steady. With each step, the earth under her feet felt more hers. Not borrowed, not escaped from, reclaimed. Shaq followed a few paces behind, hands in his pockets, eyes ahead. When they reached the car, Maya opened the door and paused. "You know what I want to do next?" she asked. Shaq raised an eyebrow. "What?" "Not tell my story for a while," she said, with a quiet grin. "Just live it." And for the first time in a long time, he smiled back. "Good," he said. "That's exactly what you earned." As they drove away from the bluff, the wind moved through the tall grass again, rustling the edges of the trail where silence had once screamed. But now, it was quiet in the way healing is quiet. The plaque remained, and behind it the wind whispered her name, not as a warning, but as memory, as proof, as echo, forever reclaimed. What if the next Maya doesn't survive the fall? What if the next Charles rewrites the story before we ever hear it? This isn't just fiction, it's a mirror, a question, a warning. Stay alert, stay loud, and when silence shows up dressed as power, don't look away.